I wanted to focus today a bit on genetic engineering and the genetic engineering crimes against nature that relate to the climate crisis and the crisis of biodiversity. GMOs, as you full well know, are nothing more than the latest stage of industrial food and farming. We had a terrible food and farming system in 1994 when Monsanto's first genetically engineered product came on the market, bovine growth hormone, and we have an industrial food and farming system today that's even worse than in '94. One of the things we need to look at is the fact that there's not just 400 parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, there's 486 parts per million. We don't talk as much about the nitrous oxide, which comes from the chemical fertilizers primarily used in industrial agriculture that have increased since genetically engineered crops came on the market. We don't talk that much about methane, much of which comes from factory farms, which are the #1 buyers of genetically engineered crops and seeds. We don't talk as much about the black soot and so on that are the result of the slash and burn agriculture, which farmers have to revert to because they have been, their traditional knowledge and access to land and so on have been stripped away, leaving farmers in many cases with no option other than to do something that they know is not right, the slash and burn. So the other thing is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the way they tell us about the greenhouse gas crisis, they typically use just a couple of categories: transportation, utilities, manufacturing. This is very misleading. The #1 cause of global warming in the world today is our out-of-control industrial food, farming, and land use system. Now, why do I say this? Well, you typically hear, oh yeah, agriculture contributes 15% of all greenhouse gases. Well, I mean, there's no such thing as agriculture separated off from food and farming and land use. It's true, approximately 15% of all fossil fuel use in the world today is directly attributable to industrial agriculture. Okay, but let's look at the other greenhouse gas pollution coming out of our food, farming, and land use system. Okay, another 15 to 20% of all greenhouse gases come from whacking down the forests, draining the wetlands, burning up the peat bogs. You know, most of which today is attributable not to industrial timber companies who are doing their own degeneration. It's coming from growing genetically engineered soybeans in Brazil and Paraguay and Argentina. It's coming from these crazed, destructive palm oil plantations that are going into processed food, that are going into ethanol. You know, the majority of destruction to forests and wetlands today is coming from this same GMO supercharged industrial food farming system. Okay, let's look a little further. You can't separate agriculture from brainwashed consumers, you know, who tend to buy in the industrialized countries processed food. Okay, 15 to 20% of all greenhouse gases come from processing food, packaging food, and distributing food, long distances, okay? And then finally we come to the fact that I noticed even here in Paris, it seems like most people just take their food waste and just throw it in the garbage, you know? And then it goes into the landfill and turns into methane. This adds up, any way you want to look at it, at the majority of greenhouse gases are coming from this GMO supercharged industrial food farming and land use system. And there is no way we're going to get down to zero emissions by 2030 or 2050 without a global transformation of this degenerate food and farming and land use system. And other things that we typically don't look at, it's like since the advent of industrial food and farming, we've literally stripped out 136 billion tons of carbon that used to be in the soil. Guess where that 136 billion tons of carbon is now? It's up in the sky, it's in the ocean. Our job is not just to stop putting it up there, we got to start sucking it down and putting it back in the ground where it used to be, where it can do carbon in the atmosphere. Too much carbon is destructive. CO2 in the ground, sequestered by natural regenerative farming and ranching and land use, is a positive thing that promotes soil fertility, that retains water, that produces more nutritious food, that enables the 500 million small farmers across the world to make a decent living and feed themselves. The oceans. The oceans are on the verge of death. They can't absorb any more CO2. A lot of people don't understand that almost half of the greenhouse gas pollutions that we put up every year are actually, they're drawn back down into the oceans and the soils. You know, this is Mother Nature trying to rebalance the damage that GMOs and industrial agriculture are doing, and we've overburdened the oceans. And of course, we're letting industrial agriculture and GMOs create these dead zones all over the world by their reckless use of fertilizers, pesticides, factory farms. We're literally killing areas like where I grew up on the Gulf Coast of Texas. This dead zone is the size of the state of New Jersey. And who's to blame for this? Well, 42 states in the United States drain in to the Mississippi Basin, or they're killing the Gulf of Mexico. And where does this pollution come from? It comes from factory farms that depend on GMOs. You know, it comes from the overuse of these fertilizers and pesticides. And yeah, some of it comes from lousy sewage treatment plants along the way. Biodiversity. The biodiversity that doesn't get talked enough about are these little animals who live below the soil. And I guarantee you, if we don't start paying attention to the little animals below the soil, the microorganisms, we're doomed. You know, without a healthy soil that can sequester this excess carbon in the atmosphere and that can prevent these other greenhouse gases from going up there, we're done. The capture of the international seed market by these GMO companies, Monsanto, Bayer, BASF, Syngenta, Dow, DuPont. This is very serious business because the seeds of the world are the seeds that have enabled us to have a balanced climate. So, I'm not going to talk about what my specialty has been for the last 22 years fighting Monsanto and the others, the damage to human health from poisoned food. Industrial food is poison. GMO industrial food's even more poisonous. We got to stop eating it. If we care about the climate, if we care about health, if we care about justice, we have to put our money where our mouth is. You know, factory farms are the #1 problem causing global warming. If we don't stop eating meat and animal products that come out of these factory farms, and if you're going to consume meat and animal products, it's got to be grazed holistically, the way traditional communities and indigenous communities always did it. We have to take down this system, and we have to take it down fairly quickly because we got to get to zero emissions ASAP, and we got to suck down literally from the atmosphere over 100 billion tons of carbon that are up there, or we're done. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Presentation, but just specifically coming from the United States, I'm obviously interested in looking at how the food system specifically affects communities of color. when you talk about the issue, you've talked about brainwashed consumers. I'm not sure that that is a term that I would personally choose, but I love the explanation. But also just talking about the illusion of choice. When you talk about consumers, the illusion of choice, when you have food deserts, when you talk about people not being even being able to afford food, I think that's important to put in terms of a larger picture, in terms of how do black communities in the United States, how do they get their food? Are they able to get their food? So like a class and race analysis is also really important as we talk about the food system, because we do know that communities of color are affected disproportionately. So yeah, I don't know, maybe if you have just a comment about that.
Yes. That's very important, and I'm the director of Organic Consumers Association in the United States, and we promote the idea of what we call organic justice. And this is the idea that everyone deserves access to top quality food and to information about that food. And obviously, we live in a country of food injustice in the United States. The perfect example is that of all the industrialized countries in the world, the United States, the average household spends less money for food. You know, it's around 10%, and most of that is eating out in restaurants, okay? However, if you look at the people in the United States who have the lowest 20% of income, they're spending 50% of their household income on food, and most of the food that's available in the low-income neighborhoods is junk food. And so we have to simultaneously address the issue of organic justice while we talk about the damage to public health from miseducation and you know, our practices. But it's a question of economic justice as well as regenerative agriculture. I agree 100%. We have a lousy government in the United States that doesn't care about poor people and would just as soon, you know, ship all the brown people and black people out of the country if they could. So we need a revolution in the United States and not just a food revolution.
Thank you. Thank you.